Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Greetings and peace. I am Baraka Blue, and you are tuned in to Path and Present Podcast. This episode is with the world-renowned photographer Peter Sanders, and we're speaking about his new book, Heaven and Earth and the 10,000 Things, The Lives of Muslims in China. We get into the book, we speak about his journey documenting this often untold story. This book is really visually stunning, as all his books are, with the photographs of the culture and the mosque and the people and the food and just the whole world that he lets you into. But also there's some writings in there from Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah, from Sachika Murada. So it's a really blessed book, and I recommend everybody checks it out. We also, in this conversation, speak about his journey and the time that he had when he embraced the path in Morocco with Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib, and the journey that he's been on. So it's a really blessed conversation, and I look forward to sharing it with you. Before we get into it, I just want to make an announcement. We have an upcoming retreat with Rumi Center for Spirituality and the Arts in collaboration with Lila. And this is Muraqaba. It is a meditation retreat in Indonesia on the island of Bali that will be co-led with myself and Dr. Abdullah Rothman. Muraqaba is a meditation practice rooted in the Islamic Sufi tradition that involves observing the heart and deepening one's connection to the divine presence. This retreat will be a time for stillness, for silence, for contemplation in nature, for going within and learning this ancient and precious practice of observing one's heart and bringing one's awareness to the divine presence. Of course, it'll also be a time for good community and connection as well. So everybody is welcome, and you can visit muraqabaretreat.com or rumicenter.love to learn more. That is January 29th, or rather December 29th through January 4th. So it's over New Year's. Good way to ring in the new year. Alhamdulillah. Also, Rumi Center has an upcoming course, a 99 names course for the first 99 days of the year. So we'll start January 1st. And each day you will get a guided meditation and reflection on one of the names, which explains it, defines it, drawing on some of the great masters and teachers and Sufis of our tradition. So again, you can learn more about that on rumicenter.love. It's virtual, so anyone can join, and it's one of the most impactful courses that we've run. This will actually be, I think, the 4th time running it. So it's an annual course, but all are welcome, inshallah. Other than that, I just want to thank everyone who is supporting this podcast. You know who you are. This podcast is community supported, and it has always been that way. And if you consider these conversations valuable and you want them to continue, the best way to make that a reality is to become a patron, and you can do so at patreon.com/pathandpresent. And there are various tiers of support, starting with $5 a month. So if this is valuable to you and you want to see it, the way to show us that is to support in that way. Secondly, I want to thank Sufi Corner. Sufi Corner is the sponsor of this season of the podcast. Sufi Corner is an organization based in New Jersey and New York City who supports Islamic arts and spirituality and intellectual life through programs, through gatherings, and through sponsoring this podcast. So shout out to Sufi Corner. I encourage everybody to find them on Instagram. They're very active and they share all of their programs. They just had our friends Firdaus Ensemble, and they currently have a intellectual series where they're bringing various authors, philosophers, translators, and thinkers to showcase their work and translations. So I highly recommend you check that out. All right, y'all. And with that, here's Peter Sanders. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah. So, I guess of all the topics you could do a book on, I think for me, knowing a little bit about you and your journey, your last book on the saints and sages of Islam, I understand that one. I understand why. Because once you've encountered them,
Yeah.
what else is there to talk about? But your new book is on Islam in China, which I think maybe would be less self-explanatory to some people as far as why of all topics. So what is it about your experience there, your experience with the Muslims of China that made you want to tell that story?
I think as far back as late 60s, early 70s, I was always fascinated by the fact that there were Muslims in China and in Russia. Two places that at that time I would never expected there to be a community of Muslims. And because the cultures of those countries were so strong, I was really curious to go there. In late 90s, I got as far as Turkmenistan. We did plan to go into Uzbekistan, but the border was closed and we weren't able to go there. And then in 2000, I started my trips to China. So I did an initial trip, which was to Beijing, Xi'an, and Inner Mongolia. And I just fell in love with the place. I fell in love with it because they were not Chinese who became Arabs. They were Chinese who have accepted Islam, but kept their Chinese culture. And seeing the mosques in the old mosque in Beijing, which for those who haven't seen it, it's red with gold illumination, and then the ceiling is blues and greens and reds. And it's just such a stunning place, and it's so contrary to any other mosque you've ever seen. But then when I went to Xi'an and saw the old mosques of Xi'an, I first went to the old one, which they say was built first, and the only way I can describe it is a mixture between a Japanese garden. It has elements of feng shui in it. It's Chinese, but it's a mosque. And so you see bonsai trees, you see weathered rocks, there's small pagodas. So when you enter the mosque, you go through a gate, and then you go through a series of gardens and gates till eventually you get to the prayer hall. So by the time you've got to the prayer hall, you're already in a meditative state. I mean, all the concerns of the world have left you. And then they built the Grand Mosque, which was based on that one, but it's much, much bigger. So it's a much longer process to actually get to the prayer hall. And then when you get to the prayer hall, you go in, and there are 30 panels of wood around the prayer room. On each wood is carved a juz of Quran in Arabic, and underneath it has a Chinese translation. So you, in the prayer space, you're surrounded by the whole Quran carved into wood in Chinese and Arabic. And that just really was just like such a powerful experience. And by then I was like smitten. I think the final thing that happened in Xi'an, I got taken to a madrasa, and I was going to meet the children and photograph them. And I got there and they said, just be patient, the children are getting ready for you. And then after about 10 or 15 minutes, they all came out, all these kids, and they sat in front of me. And they were all, I don't know what ages, 7 to 10 or something. And each of the girls had little scarves on, and the boys had hats, like some of them 3 sizes too big. And they sat in front of me and they recited Quran as a group. And they sang songs about Islam, and they just like swayed from left to right. It was just like, I've seen everything. There was such a, we're talking about the word himma, you know, spiritual enthusiasm. There was such a himma there from those children.
Yeah.
They were not oppressed. They were doing this because they really loved it. And I thought, this must what it must have been like at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you know.
Yeah, and I think your point about, you know, Thomas Cleary, who is, you know, obviously of the 20th century, probably the greatest translator of Eastern texts, Far Eastern texts, but also translated the Quran. And he mentioned something to the effect, I heard Sheikh Hamza talking about it, that Western people can't even begin to think about thinking about Islam. It's like there's this barrier. And, you know, he, as someone who really went into the Far Eastern traditions, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, then coming to Arabic and the Quran, you know, he brought a different flavor. And I think, you know, yourself and your generation, also my generation coming a few decades later, a lot of us were turning east for spirituality and exploring the Far Eastern traditions before Islam. And then through Sufism saw almost like a middle ground that has that profound spirituality, but also has the, you know, the Abrahamic narratives and things that, but, you know, I'd love to hear more about what you found about the Chinese tradition, because so many people have, just Western people and even Muslims, there's just assumptions about what the heart of the Muslim world is and what Islam is and what the experience of a Muslim is and what it should look like. And if it doesn't, well, that's not, I don't recognize that, you know. And I was so moved, and we were talking off mic about the fact that the Chinese, you know, which is very interesting about them as a people too, different than the West, where there was these clear demarcations about religion. This is the Christian world, this is the, you know, Muslim world, etc. But China was really, you know, the classical Chinese civilization, it was the 3 jewels: Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. And like everyone, an educated person became studied in each of these. And I was so moved to hear that the Muslims in China, they also studied the 3 jewels and then said, you're missing the 4th jewel. Islam is the 4th jewel. And so they weren't like, oh no, we're Muslim, we don't study Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism. They actually mastered those. And then said, put that in conversation. And even the language they use, which, mashallah, when you took me through some of the book, and read like the, you know, the letter from the emperor about the Prophet, you know, calling him the greatest sage, and what do they call it? The religion of the pure and true. You know, this sense where they put it in conversation with terms and frames that would have been understood to their people. So I wonder if you might reflect on that.
Because this is after the initial period when, you know, the Sahaba and sons of Sahaba went as ambassadors to China. But in the Ming dynasty, as far as I understand, there were 2 great Muslim scholars, and they got together and they said, the only way we can teach Islam to the Chinese is if we understand, basically if we become like Buddhist monks or Taoist monks. So they did, they studied it, and then they said, we can't use Arabic because they don't understand Arabic. It's so intelligent, you know, and so they adopted this whole language that the Chinese used anyway. And so the Chinese didn't see it as a threat. It was a continuation of what they already understood. And that's when Islam really spread, and as you said, the emperor became a Muslim. And I found that really fascinating for me as someone who's accepted Islam living in the West, and the challenges of translating what I've accepted into a conversation with someone from this country. We don't have this culture of peace and meditation like the Chinese do. It's part of their nature. They are like that in their, I mean, not so much modern Chinese, but the traditional Chinese. Our reference point is Sayyidina Isa, is Jesus. But do we know enough about him? Are we taught enough about who he really was in this society? I don't think we do. And so it made me really reflect on, we've always presented Islam in this culture as a kind of alien thing, and it's been treated as an alien thing. And that's part of our ignorance, really. There's a lot in common with Christians, but we really haven't found what that common ground is, I think. It's like people come, multi-faith people, they come together, but it's like, it's on my terms and it's on your terms, but there isn't really a meeting point, or it doesn't seem that happens very often, which is a pity. So yeah, it's really made me think a lot about that, and I haven't found the answers. I mean, I'm just, okay, that's where we kind of made a mistake, you know. But then there were people in the past, like Lady Evelyn Cobbold. You know, she didn't become something else. She was still a aristocratic lady who had accepted Islam, you know, and she arrived at it by her own intelligence. No one persuaded her. And I like that there have been people in the past who did arrive at it by their own, you know, thinking and understanding. I think maybe, and this is not apportioning blame, but I think the whole Indo-Pak culture was very strong, and I think they clung on to that culture because they were scared of losing their Islam in the process. So I think maybe that confused the picture a little bit. But yeah, I think it's really something we really need to understand and explore as a community.
Yeah, no, and you feel that in America, for instance, I think the Muslim community is more ethnically diverse. It's more a cross section of the Muslim world.
Yeah.
And so, but here, outside of London especially, you feel it. There's a dominant expression of Islam that is a group, and that I can see how for converts, for instance, and others from, you know, different walks of life, it kind of gives a choice between, like, there's this normative expression of Islam that is, you know, through one cultural container. You either have to take that cultural container on, or you really have to, I don't know, the other option is to really be kind of like odd in a sense, like, and really, you know. So yeah, I mean, and that is an interesting thing that I've been thinking about, because in, you know, Indonesia with the Wali Songo, or in Senegal, or in, you know, places in the pre-modern world when Islam took root in a land, it was the Muslims, and usually people of great spiritual insight, who said, okay, we're not going to be able to just practice it in the way that it was practiced back somewhere else. We have to actually adapt this, the expression of this, to the context of the people and their culture and their mentality. And there was enough, like, separation in a certain sense that could take place, because there's like and that's one of the beauties of Islam, is there's almost like an indigenous ground up culture that, you know, when Western people think of organized religion, they think of like the papacy and like the bishops and this hierarchy, and Islam really just doesn't have that. And so it's like Sheikh Abdul Hakim Rad, kind of in his unique, sense of humor. But when I first met him and he said, "Oh, what's your journey to Islam?" And I said, I never thought I'd be part of an organized religion. He said, "It's not that organized." Which is very like his humor, but also there's a truth. I understood he was getting at a wisdom, like it's not organized in the way that Westerners think of an organized religion.
Absolutely.
And so that allowed like organic, local expressions of Islam.
Yeah.
But I wonder in the globalized world where everybody's watching YouTube and they're, so you're watching the Sheikh in America or the Sheikh in Pakistan or and you're in Manchester or wherever, like it's weird. It almost like stifles a little bit or at least complicates the development, the organic development of indigenous expressions of Islam. It seems like.
And it always was, if you look at the way the Habaib went into places in remote parts of Africa, and they would just set up a little shop and like a little grocer's or something, and people would come and buy things, and they would always be very generous. And then the people would say after a while, "Well, how come you always give us extra sugar or extra tea?" And they say, "This is our way, And slowly they would explain about Islam, and that's how, it spread just on a very natural. It wasn't a hierarchy; it was just individuals, And I think that's a much more organic way of it.
Yeah, and I think even like the modern West, which is in many senses like post-Christian. I had this really interesting interaction with someone in Seattle, which my city, and it's more like Europe than other cities in America in that it's the least kind of church-going region of America. So it's a lot of, but so interesting conversations. And I remember I was talking to this individual, and he happened to like work for Twitter or something. And he said to me, we started talking about spirituality and things, and he said, I'm atheist, but I don't want to be. And then he said, he talked about how he had like incorporated, kind of Buddhist mindfulness practices into his life. And I started talking about Rumi, and then he was really interested in that. And then, he asked me, said something like, he said, "So are you atheist or agnostic?" Like those are the two options. And I was like, and I just said to him, I said, I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in too. And he was like, whoa, like it really shifted something from him. And like, I'm looking behind you at this beautiful scroll of the 99 names of Allah that's written in the Chinese style. And it's like, that's even the kind of like modern Western people that are really fed up with religion or can't find themselves, that interested in it, but are still looking for meaning. And because that's the thing that all these statistics show, people leave religion, but they still hold up. There has to be something bigger. They still feel intuit. And it's like, okay, Allah, it's what we, like, it's so much greater than what people think it is. Like, you worship a man in the cloud. Like, it's like this childish thing, but it's like the first and the last, the manifest and the hidden, the reality itself. Like, all of these names, it's just so profound to really, and you can imagine like the Chinese Muslims exploring those things within a culture where they may have not even talked about God in the same way that is familiar to Abrahamic, but they talk about heaven and the earth and the way that conforms to heaven and the reality itself, and all these kind of things. And I think we need to really think deeply about how we express this way vis-a-vis the place and time that we are.
Yeah, I agree. It has to relate to what people, because I wasn't looking for a religion. I was looking for a spiritual path. That's what I was interested in. I wanted to be able to change myself.
Yes.
And it just happened that the two are encoded in one another. And it made sense to me when it was explained to me in that way. But most people as you say, are not they want a religion. They had it sort of forced down their throats a little bit, and that's not what they want. But they want to know their path through life. They want to be more peaceful. They want to be more fulfilled. All these things that human beings want, and then they want to get past the distraction of all this stuff in the world and all these things that go on here. So I think, the conversation definitely has to change vis-a-vis, and even using the word God is, and it's, I tend to use it rather than Allah because I don't want to put a barrier. But even the word God is very loaded because people have an idea of what that means, and in a way, the Chinese had a language that was kind of understood, the most real, the highest truth, that I can relate to that.
Yeah,
it kind of
too.
it really talks to me, that language.
Yeah, me too.
I always wondered why a lot of Westerners went towards Buddhism, obviously the peaceful side of it. But it does have a kind of almost like a non-personal God.
Yeah.
And whereas Islam doesn't, it's very personal to each of us. As this guy said once, when he had this huge opening, and he said, I thought you only ever spoke to your saints and prophets. And the voice came back and said, no, I speak to everybody, they're just not listening.
Yeah.
And I think we need that. It's the spiritual path is a lonely road to travel.
Yes. Yeah, I've encountered, I'm sure you have too, a number of people that walked the Buddhist path for quite some time and found great good, but then eventually were like, I believe in God though. I need, you know what I mean? I believe in, it's really amazing. And I'm curious too, maybe you have thoughts about, your generation in the 60s and 70s, and there was so much turning east for spirituality, and there was, it was like a mass movement. All of a sudden, it wasn't just the fringe and the kind of the beat poets kind of beforehand were really on that cutting edge, but it became this mainstream thing.
Yeah.
And the Beatles were doing it and everybody was doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so, yourself and others, I've heard a lot of kind of elders in our community, it was going to Morocco, or it was going on the way to India, passing through Afghanistan and Iran and Pakistan and all Muslim countries, and meeting saints and sages and visiting the saints' tombs and all these things. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that time and that pull, and the way that it's often seen as going for the gurus and people, but the story of Islam in that is really not told. People don't even know that was there was a whole subculture within that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, got towards the end of the 60s, and then I started to read things like Emerson, and this kind of awakening took place in me that I realized there was a whole other level of understanding how things worked in the world. And of course, as you said, there was a big move towards the Indian, particularly Indian philosophy. And I went into a bookshop, I think in 1969 or something. I discovered this book. I mean, his picture just stood out to me. It was called Autobiography of a Yogi. It was the life of Paramahansa Yogananda. And I read that book, and it really kind of spoke to me because he went on a quest to find a teacher. I mean, he was Indian, and his whole journey, through all the saints and sages of India, I really, that kind of made sense to me. I mean, I didn't know there was such a thing as great teachers and masters and saints and sages and this whole world, which was very existent in the whole Indian culture at that time. But what's interesting for me is that I've discovered in the last few years that that book was Steve Jobs' favourite book.
Mm-hmm.
And so much so that when he died, it was given away to everyone that attended the funeral. He requested that in his will.
Mm.
And he used that book as a reference, as I did. And he went to India and he went to the ashram. I think, from what I've seen, I think Yogananda had already passed away, as with me. So he wasn't living. And I went to the ashram, and while it was a beautiful place, I just felt there wasn't a living teacher there. And so I didn't believe that was my stopping point, so I carried on my journey. But he was a beautiful soul, and he met people like Einstein, and it's such an interesting journey. He came to the West in the 50s. I mean, he has a big ashram they built in Los Angeles, huge. And he came at a time when, again, little was known, but there was a group of people that were interested in spirituality, and he kind of connected with them. So it was, these people are always around. You just have to look for them and find them. Yeah, so that was my kind of journey. And then, I went to India on my own kind of quest, and kind of was looking at different religions that I came across, including Buddhism and Sikhism and Hinduism. And I remember on my travels I read a little bit about Islam, and I came across a few Muslims. And then, in fact, I really discovered it properly when I came back to the West, which is kind of typical journey. You travel off hundreds and thousands of miles and find what you were looking for was already where you started.
Yeah, can you share a little bit about that early community you're part of, and just the, what was it like? What was the experience of being, the kind of newness and the freshness and the exploration of that, and just the people that were involved, because I think, I've spoken to yourself and, Abdul Moore, Hamoun, Hakeem Archuleta, and Dr. Omar, and quite a few people that were part of it, but I still think a lot of people, it's such an interesting and important chapter of Islam in the West that still very few people even know about.
Yeah, and I think I think it helped so much. So I came back from India after meeting my teacher there, and I spent 7 months in India, 6 months with my teacher there, who was basically a Hindu, but he had Muslim followers. He was a saintly person, and he had Muslim followers and Sikh followers and everything, and he kind of was very inclusive with them. And then I got sick, and it was time to come back, so I came back, and I then met so I met friends of mine, musicians who had become Muslim while I'd been in India. And of course, meeting someone from my own culture really helped it a lot. Yeah. And I still wasn't sure, because I was like meditating every day, and I was kind of quite happy with what I had. But then I met them, and a couple of things happened. One of them was a dream in which my teacher from India was standing at the door of a classroom, and he was inviting me into the classroom. And in the classroom were those friends of mine that I'd met who had become Muslim. And there was a very clear indication that was the direction I should go. I didn't know a lot about Islam at that time. I knew that it accepted all the prophets, which made 100% sense to me, and there was a clarity about Islam that I liked. Whereas the Hindu thing can be very confusing if you don't understand that all those forms are meant to be a particular aspect of God, And so within a few weeks, I accepted Islam. I remember that. So then I finally went to see somebody And I just said, can you explain to me about Sufism? Because as I said to you, I wasn't looking for religion, I was looking for a spiritual path. And he explained it to me in a very good way, like, if you just take the outward form of Islam, just what they, like the 5 prayers, the fasting, the Hajj, it's like a structure, but the spiritual aspect, or what they say are the spiritual practices that the Prophet himself did, the extra things he did, this is the main thing. But if you take just those by themselves, that's dangerous. It's like plugging into the mains without any protection or any insulation. So you need the cup and you need the drink. And so when it was explained to me like that, it made absolute sense. And they said, at some point you need to enter through the door of Islam. I said, okay, I'm ready now. Even though I knew very little about it, it was just a complete, total impulse, instinct, just, yes, that's right, that's what you have to do. And I ended up, it was actually a carpet shop in Chelsea. I ended up, having a shower and saying the Shahada there. So that was it. And then within 3 weeks, I was in Morocco meeting Sidi Imam Habib.
Subhanallah, within
in
3 weeks.
Zawiya in Magnes, yeah. So I became Muslim just a few weeks before Ramadan. And then I went to Magnes and spent the whole of Ramadan in the Zawiya there, which was tough, I have to say. That place it was tough. I mean, it stripped away all my comforts, all my culture that I was so close to, and I was just with these incredible people who outwardly looked really tough. And at some point I thought, I think I made a mistake, I need to go back. Become a Hindu again. But then I realized these guys outwardly were very strong, but they had hearts of gold, and they were so sweet and gentle with me, and just made fasting that much easier. And it was, so I spent the whole of Ramadan in the Zawiya. On the Eid day, all the fuqara appeared in white jalabas, and they served this, I'll never forget it, they served this white milky rice dessert which had rose water on it, and then I went out, and at the back of Sidi Imam Habib Zawiya is this beautiful garden, it's a public garden, and it was so green and the blue of the sky. I thought, wow, that's what the fasting was all about.
What was Sidi Muhammad ibn Habib like with his murids, and how were they with him?
He was everything. We would sit in the Zawiya. He would come down every day after Asr, and the place would fill up. I mean, it was quite large, the Zawiya. Just all these people would come in after Asr, and it would be full, and he'd come down and he'd give a dars every day, which was tafsir of Quran. In fact, those talks, so that was 50 odd years ago, have just been translated. And they're going to publish it, I think, later this year, which I'm so happy about. So he was giving those talks, and people, I mean, I didn't speak Arabic, so I was just picking up on the whole atmosphere of the place. And sometimes he would say things, people would just swoon and pass out. It's all tafsir of Quran.
Was he soft-spoken, or do you have a really powerful...
Yeah, he was so, but he was strong when he needed to be strong. He had these two aspects.
He was over 100 years old at this point.
He was 100 years old, yeah. And it was all around Quran. Sidi Hamid, the Quran reciter, was a Zit, and he recited an ayah of Quran, and then he would start giving tafsir on it, and he would work his way through the Quran. And the kind of people there, I mean, when I think about it now, it must have been what it was like at the time of Sheikh Junaid or Abdul Qadir Jilani. I mean, just the atmosphere and the intensity of that, what was ever going on there. And then during the day, we would just be living, those Westerners that were living in the Zawiya, he would come down and check on us, and I could always feel his presence before he came into a room. It's like a master ship, that comes into the docks with all the tugs bring it in. You just feel his presence, and A friend of mine told me that he was sitting in the Zawiya trying to learn Arabic, and Saad ibn Abi Habib came down and sat by him and taught him the basic, alif, ba, ta. That's a sign of a great sheikh that can come to that level and teach you the basic things, And it was just a whole thing. There were the women hidden away. These meals just used to turn up from nowhere. Often there were times when there was no food in the Zawiya, and one of his closest murids, Hajj Ali, who's buried next to him in the Zawiya, who was a rich merchant, would come and take us all to his house. Simon Habiba told him that he should feed 40 people every day, which he did.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, and he used to come to the Zawiya. Always knew when there was nothing there, and he'd come and take us all and feed us. So we would break the fast in his house and everything.
So you have this milieu of the traditional Moroccan way, and from my understanding, there was like great scholars as well as just common folk and merchants and poor people, beggars, and everyone came, right?
Yeah.
And then you have these Westerners showing up who are, there's a lot of kind of like on the hippie trail that kind of found this path. What was that like? What was that like? And then also, like, what did Sheikh Muhammad ibn Habib, did he deal differently with the Westerners? Did he say anything, or did he indicate, do you feel like he had a special concern or interest, anything like that? Yeah.
Well, I heard later, and this is, I think, one of the wives told me that he told the Moroccan fuqara, whatever you see the Westerners do not criticize them. And you realize the hikmah in that, because we're all from the West, we all got big egos and stuff. And if anyone started criticizing us, we would have been out the door, He told them, whatever you see them doing, do not criticize them. And that's from a very deep point of wisdom, And they were always very sweet to us. And we were always amazed at their strength and caliber of human beings. I tell the story in Meetings with Mountains that, I saw it was Qud Abdul Salam, one of the poor fuqara, and I saw him one day just clutching his stomach. Obviously, he was really in intense pain. He was leaning up against one of the columns, and he was just saying over and over again, Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal, Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal, Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal. Praise be to God in all states. This is from deep iman,
Yes.
And Sidi Ali, who I got to know and love so much, who was really miskeen. He was blind, but he was sent by his sheikh to look after the Zawiya and look after the fuqara, and he did that. And after Saad ibn Abi died, I said to him, I'm leaving tomorrow, but I want to see you before I go. Where will you be? He said, if I'm not in the Zawiya, I'll be out in the street begging. Because that's where there's no social security in these places. They're totally dependent upon what God gives them through his creation.
Sure.
And that was his reality. But he was a prince, really, in the unseen world. He looked like a beggar, but in the unseen world, he was very high maqam. I loved sitting with him, learned a lot from him. One of the things I learned from him was that there was never this question, like when it came time to pray or when it came time to recite the wird. It's just like, you just do it. It's like, don't think about it. You just do it. Like, it's time for the prayer, pray. Don't like, oh, well, okay, I'll do it in 5 minutes when I'm ready or when I've finished doing this. No, you do it on time, and that. I learned that a lot from them, which was really important to understand.
And obviously Sheikh Muhammad ibn Habib, his diwan, his collection of poetry is so amazing, and it's still sung to this day, and it's like sung all around the world, and it's been a big impact on myself.
Yeah.
Did he like comment on his poetry? Were the poems sung in the gatherings around him? Is there a sense too of like that his poetry, because one thing they say is like the awliya, they reveal themselves most in their poetry. Because there's, with poetry you can really expose your state, and also, there's poetic license, so people,
Yeah.
So I don't know if you had any thoughts about
To
that.
be honest, because I was only with him that month, and then
Yeah.
he died on the way to Hajj.
Subhanallah.
So really, I only had that experience, and that was Ramadan, and he was just really giving tafsir on Quran. I think after, and also I didn't speak Arabic, but I wouldn't be surprised, like after Muslim or something, if they'd sung something, he might just speak about one line or something, some insight that came, but he didn't particularly. They were what they were, and the way they were all revealed in different places is so, they definitely were sent to him. They say after gathering on, they had a gathering on the beach somewhere, and then the qasida about reflection on the creation and the ocean and the mountains, that he, apparently he just wrote it down, and someone just picked it up, and so they were written in just states and things. I think Nakun Firadati was after visiting the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. But they are amazing, honestly. I mean, I've lived with that D1 for over 50 years, and it's full of gems. Really, it really is an ocean. I read this thing Habib Ahmed Mashur, her dad said. He said to somebody, "You and I, our knowledge is the equivalent of a bird pecking on the ocean." If Habib Ahmed says that, where are we?
And then I wonder if you might share a bit about, it seemed like a lot of the community of Western seekers that found Islam were artists, creative types, and subsequently, like yourself with photography, but there's authors and poets and musicians, and I wonder if you might reflect on that and what that means, and just like the importance of the arts as well, and in that journey, and why is it that, I kind of like joke that it's like Allah's like, I have enough doctors and engineers and pharmacists, so like I'm gonna call the artists. But I'm just curious, if you have any thoughts about that. And
well, I mean, I'm supposed to go to Uzbekistan this year, which is a place I haven't been to on the whole Silk Route, and I've been researching and been told that Sheikh Naqshband came, and from Sheikh Naqshband came 7 of his sheikhs, and each one was like the head of a guild. So one was the head of ceramics, one was the head of calligraphy, and so that in Uzbekistan the arts were really part of the dawah and the spreading of Islam. And I think because of the culture that we live in, where art is such a important aspect of it, and where people find a lot of nourishment from the arts, I think there's probably hikmah in why many of us have been in that field. I mean, we do have our own scholars as well, and we wouldn't have Islam without people like Sheikh Abdul Hakim and Sheikh Hamza and Dr. Omar. I mean, it's important for religion, you have to have the scholars, but it's also important that people can translate how they experience the religion through art forms.
Yes.
And I think that is really essential. I'm someone I've always loved photography from when I was very small. It really speaks to me, and I'm not really I'm talking like crazy here, but I'm not really a wordy person. I spent most of my life hiding behind cameras because I found it very difficult to communicate what I often felt inside. But images, I could do it. And I think musicians have that same thing. I think poets have that thing. And so I think it is really important. It's essential. I think the religion would be very dry if it was just the academic side of it. For certain people, they need that, but for I don't consider myself academic. But I think it's kind of, I still love photography, and I love the medium. I think film is a very powerful medium, and it's misused in today's culture. But you have images and sound. That's that's almost getting close to what we experience in the world. So it's again a very powerful form, very misused, very misunderstood, its purpose, but I think it has a place. And this is a culture where you're surrounded by film and music and all these things. So yeah, I think I think there's hikmah in it. And particularly at this time now, I think in the 60s, music was a very strong thing. I think now it's images. Kids really relate to images. They communicate with images. So it's definitely, it's almost like we're reversing. It's like going back to wall painting.
Subhanallah. Yeah, no, I think that's really beautiful. I heard this Christian philosopher recently said something to the effect of, the spiritual life has always been about goodness, truth, and beauty.
Yeah.
And those are all kind of united in the divine reality. And he said in our time, truth, it's hard to call people through truth because I have my truth, you have your truth. And so if you say this is the truth, a lot of people recoil. And then he said, so you might think you can call people through the door of goodness because people like goodness. But he said that the challenge with that is when you assert something is good, you're saying something is bad. When you say something's right, something is wrong. And people also recoil from that.
Yeah.
And he said, but the door that's really the most open in our time and the most important is beauty, because you can't really, we have the least defenses to beauty. It's just beauty. And I heard Cat Stevens, Yusuf Hassan, said something to the effect of, you can argue with the philosopher, but you can't argue with a good song. It's just, and so I think that I really believe that, the art is, the arts are of utmost importance for us. Yeah.
And because if you say God is only in the religious books, that's also the denial of, because God talks to us in many ways. Can talk to us through music, can talk to you through poetry, he can talk to you through any means. And when I think about my own journey, I may have told the story before, but when I was in India traveling around on my own, I was on a station, it was before dawn, and in those days, and I'm sure it's the same in India, it always felt like the whole of India was nomadic. You'd go to a train station, it would be packed with people, all with all their possessions, and just like all this chaos and people moving. And I was watching all this, and I was on my search, and suddenly I saw in the middle of all this chaos a woman roll out a prayer mat and start to pray. Now, I'd never seen the Muslim prayer before in my life, but there was a stillness. I saw this stillness within all this movement, and I went over there, and there was a young man sort of standing by just to make sure someone didn't knock her over or anything. And I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Oh, this is my grandmother. She's a Muslim. She's doing the Muslim prayer." So see how God showed me, almost like in a snapshot, that thing. And it's always been there. But when I came back to England, I completely forgot about it. I remembered it after I became a Muslim. So there are signs, on the horizon and within ourselves. We get shown these things. We missed a lot of them. We're missing them all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, all arts are kind of like modalities of storytelling.
Yes.
It's telling the narrative, and we crave the story, we crave that. And I remember when you presented Meetings with Mountains, I think it's before it came out, we was at like a Greensville Trust with Sheikh Ibrahim in Liverpool, and I was writing poetry. You kind of gave a sideshow presentation, and I was really moved by it because, I mean, that's it's hard to explain to people outside of Islam, or at least outside of the spiritual path, because I think people that have encountered great saints and sages and other traditions they can really meet you on this. But there's something that, like, once you encounter those people, that it shifts the whole definition of what a person is and what you're doing here and what you're striving to be in this really tangible way without words. Just you witness, like, okay, this opened for me a sense of what a person can be and what it's supposed to be. But the way you kind of like told it through your art, and then I like to about that, you weren't just telling a narrative about like their life story, but you were more telling it through your story of the encounter, and this is what you remember, and this is what the room was like, and this is how it was lit, and this is how you had to travel across the desert to get there, and this is what was said. It was really beautiful. And I mean, I also think like the the diversity and unity of the sages, it's like they're so the same and yet they're different. And just like that meeting place of their unique personalities and their unique context, but then the kind of like light which is the same. But I think you really capture that with your art in such a beautiful way, and it's just a great service, because forget like just Muslim, non-Muslim, but young people in general, there's not this sense of like the quest, the mountain to be climbed, that there is this journey that whether we take it or not, it's there, and there are people that have taken it. You know?
And I think this thing that struck me, especially after being in India, and the whole idea of the guru, was that I found the saints and sages of Islam very human and very accessible. They weren't out of reach. I mean, they were very accessible, and you can relate to them. And I think that was so important for me, because it was a kind of mind shift for me, that there are aspects of them that I can relate to. Of course, they have this other dimension, but on this level, we can talk to them about anything and ask them anything, and whatever advice they give is valuable for me in that meeting, And I think that's really what I was trying to share that. And I was, blessed to meet so many of them, but each one of them was very important in my journey. And obviously there's sometimes you meet people and there is a connection, but it's not, the connections are different, but each of them had something that was very praiseworthy that I could relate to, and the humanity and the frailty of some of them. I met some of them when they were really very, very ill and very close to death, and but they had such dignity about them. And I think that's always what struck me, is we tend to lose a bit of dignity in this society, the way that we die and the way that old people are treated. And Sheikh Hamza always says that in this society, an old person has no economic value, therefore they have no value. But that's totally against the spiritual tradition. The end of your life, you're supposed to give back. God's given you this amazing life. Now you have to give back to the people who need help, if you can, and I think that's very important. In a traditional society, the elders were always very well respected, always very looked after. People rushed to whatever their needs were. And here, I'm afraid that people just can't cope with it, We don't understand what these illnesses where people start to lose everything, what is happening to them at that point. We don't know, but is it really so horrible? Is something amazing happening to them? We don't know really. Maybe it's like their computers being wiped just so that what's important will remain with them. We do not understand really. There's so much we don't understand in today's world, that of what is happening to us as human beings. What does the illness mean? Why do people get sick?
Right.
What does it mean, you know?
Yeah.
Sheikh Hamza said to me the other day, not complaining to him, just telling him I hadn't been well for 3 months. He said, Sheikh Rabat al-Hajj said, what good is a body if it doesn't get sick? That's a whole different understanding, right? In this society, everyone does everything to not get sick. Vaccinations, drugs, anything. I can't get sick, I've got to work tomorrow. But maybe getting sick is to stop you so you can just refocus about your life and what's happening, you know.
Subhanallah. Yeah. MashaAllah. Oh, that's beautiful.
And there's so many things, I think, you know, nowadays that we have lost hikmah about. You know, health is one of them, you know, what we should be doing in this planet, you know, how we should be living, you know, why are there still wars after all the, you know, thousands of years still going on? That's the only way we can resolve things, through violence. Didn't we learn anything? Why is killing women and children a good idea, you know? Because certainly the people that start wars are not the ones who fight them. I mean, all that stuff from the 60s, I totally still believe it. It's like, it made 100% sense to me. And I think a lot of people are getting to the same place.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely true. And, yeah, you know, there is, inshallah, an awakening, and people are coming to see. But yet the world is always the world, you know, and
yes.
Like we were talking about previously, it's like one thing that's beautiful about the, you know, our teachers, the great ones, like they have a deep and abiding submission that makes the kind of like trials and tribulations of the world so like minuscule to them. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, this is what this place is. And that's what everyone wants, right? We all want to be less fearful and anxious and frightened about what might happen and what might not happen. And like, you know, it's interesting in our time, you know, it's like people have more and more and more, but yet people are less and less happy and less content, more anxious and more opioids to numb the, more suicide and all these things. And then from the modern Western lens, it's all a surprise, because it's like, well, no, we have more, people can gratify their needs and their pleasures. Well, why isn't it not working? But from the kind of Quranic perspective, it's exactly what you would expect, because it's like, it's not fulfilling your hawa, your fleeting desires that please. It's about dhikr Allah. It's about remembering what is eternal and what doesn't die, and giving yourself to that, and having that, you know, overwhelm in a certain sense those lower dimensions. And that's what I was thinking when you were talking too, like maybe when people think about saints or sages, they think of these recluses that, you know, or these monks that have no engagement with the world. And like you said, in Islam, it's not like that. To see that there's a real deep engagement with the world and with family and with community, and often, you know, they're just in service of people and caring for people and feeding people and teaching people and welcoming people and greeting people. And that's also really refreshing too. It's not about floating above the world. It's about being in it, but somehow being beyond it at the same time, you know?
I had this beautiful thing about Habib Ahmed Mashur, that in his younger days, you know, people used to come all day long and sit with him till midnight, and so he didn't have time, you know, for his ibadah and to spend time with his family and stuff. And the Prophet ﷺ appeared to one of these people and said, you know, leave early, you know, my Habib, he needs time with me and with his family and stuff. So they you know, they respected that, and they used to leave early and things. Because you forget, you just want to sit with them all the time, but they have their own work to do, you know. And that nurtures them so that they can give back more.
Sure.
It's interesting you talk about the whole worry thing, because it's something. It was really what set me off on my spiritual quest, because I realized that I was very anxious as a person, and it bothered me. It was just like, I was not really anxious about anything specific. It was just like a feeling that kind of descended. And I read a book a few years ago, and it was very clever, because it said all worry is about what if. What if this happens? Or what if this happens? What if that happens? And your mind can just go on infinite and imagining all this stuff. But in reality, if something happens, a crisis in front of you, you deal with it. You just go into automatic. You're not thinking about it. You'll just do something. And therefore, what is all that worrying about? I watched a film the other day. It was a really interesting film. But it's just it's a kind of spy. It's based on a true story about a lawyer who defended a Russian spy, and the lawyer said to him, "You know, they're going to execute you," and he said, "Should I worry about that? Would it help?" And I said, "Yeah, that's a great mantra. You know, should I worry about it, and will it help?" It doesn't help at all.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And like the description of the awliya in the Quran, La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. There's no fear or worry upon them, nor do they grieve.
Yeah.
And it's like fear and worry is the future, and grief is the past.
Yes.
And that's where it all arises.
Yeah.
So the awliya are fully present in the moment that Allah gives. And like, if you can be that, like, yeah, you know, that's where the walaya, that's where the friendship, that's where the door comes. And also like, yeah, even the most difficult experiences, they're not as difficult as like us worrying about them beforehand, you know, like even like some like procedure you have to go to, you know, surgery. It's like, it's way worse thinking about it and worrying about it than actually going through it.
Yeah.
It's
and if you think about the most intense pain you've ever had, which I've had the last couple of years,
Same.
I mean, I've had pain I just can't even imagine.
Oh my God.
But I'm sitting here fine, and that is like a memory. It's just like, it's not my reality. It was my reality that day. And I don't know, I'm trying to understand pain, but it forces you to be present, because there's nowhere you can go. You're just in it. You can't escape it. I mean, people try to take drugs and stuff, but you can't escape it. And therefore, it's better in this world than the next world.
Alhamdulillah. Well, Allah bless you. Allah bless the work you're doing, and bless your new book. And inshallah, we look forward to, you know, you sharing that with the world. And
yeah, I'm excited about it, and everyone I talk to about it, it's just really fascinated. I was fortunate enough to go to China on 4 trips and see a China that, I don't know if it's a Muslim China, I don't know if it still exists now.
Yeah.
I was very blessed in that time, and I got to see all these amazing, beautiful mosques, like works of art, and I got to see communities that are so strong and, you know, together and look after one another. And it's it's an amazing country, and I'm looking forward to doing the same in Uzbekistan, because I think it's a really interesting story there. And inshallah, we'll begin that journey of discovery. You know, I was really unhappy I couldn't go. We were supposed to go actually a couple of days ago, and but when I spoke to my friend there, she said Imam Bukhari's closed. I said, "Oh, good. I can't go without greeting him first." So inshallah, it'll be open when I get there.
Ameen, ameen, ameen. Jazakallah khair, Sidi. Allah bless you.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for listening to Path and Present. Path and Present is a podcast that is community supported. If you like these conversations and want to see them spread far and wide and want to become a patron of this podcast, you can visit our Patreon at patreon.com/pathandpresent. And there are various tiers where you can support this podcast. $5 a month makes you a supporter of the Path and gives you a personalized thank you note from myself. $20 a month makes you a seeker of wisdom and gives you access to a bunch of bonus material, including unreleased episodes and sessions from previous Rumi Center courses and retreats. $50 a month, you join Baraka's book club, where I share reflections on my favorite books. There's always a book of the month, and we get to reflect upon it. And of course, many of the authors featured in this podcast are some of the authors of my favorite books. So we get to dive deep on that and read together. For $100 a month, you join the Sustainer Circle, and you get a personalized shout out in an episode. And also, we have a monthly Zoom Q&A and discussion for those in the Sustainer Circle. It's an intimate group of like-minded seekers, and you also get access to everything in the previous tiers. So I want to, again, thank you for listening. Of course, like and subscribe and share with friends and family who you think might be interested. And if you want to see these conversations continue, please visit us at patreon.com/path-and-present. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.